Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Jeepers Creepers. So, the funny thing about the Jeepers Creepers movie is that every movie that is to come after this first edition of Jeepers Creepers is just heads and tails just better. Everything that happens after this movie is just so much better. Like, yeah, we might have better acting performances coming from like both the people that they mainly focus in this movie of, and then the acting performances get like worse over time. Uh I just feel that what they try to accomplish in other films, which is to focus more on the creeper's character instead of focusing weirdly on like this like Joyride, the Paul Walker movie, or like some weird dual ripoff of a movie where it seems like most of the film is having the creeper's weird uh dirted up or corroded or whatever vehicle chasing after uh, both our main characters in their own car. I'm like, why does this have to be some kind of weird chase film when really the thing that they should have been focusing on is the monstrous character? Because it kind of just feels like a clickbaiting thing to really just say that this is a monster movie, because I don't feel like we have enough there uh, that is good enough in this film, like because we spend so much more time on the creeper character in other movies. Uh, so this just kind of feels like, man, this like there's just not enough of this here. There's interesting things going on in this movie, but it's not good enough to where eventually like so many of the other sequel movies are just so good compared to this one. But anyways, so uh, where can excuse me, where can you go to find Jeepers Creepers? Well, because it may not be very convenient. I know Jeepers Creepers 3 is currently on the Sci-Fi app, SYFY. But I don't know if it's easily accessible because like Sci-Fi Network stuff is just locked behind like certain kind of like, well, hey, you need a TV provider and whatever. I can conveniently let you know where you can go to eventually find an app to watch this for free. You could probably watch every Jeepers Creepers movie possible on this app also. So there's an app that I've been using fairly reliably called Fox HD Movies. If you go ahead and search this into Google Play, you should be able to find a logo that says so. I think the title says something weirdly different. But if you go and you download that app, you should probably see any number of things for free. I've also gone on to other certain apps called TV Crush, Crush with the C, and like I have also gone on to other apps like Letter C Movies, where eventually you'd probably have to like Google search that rather than like the Play Store or the Google Play Store to search through that, because it'll be much more difficult to go through the Google Play. You should probably just Google search it, and eventually that'll also lead you to a Yes Movies and Shows app where you can also just download that too. So, Jeepers Creepers. What would I say, like to that I haven't kind of technically already said? So, like, I would say that this really is a franchise movie where you should just not just watch the first one. If anybody had just watched the first one and didn't watch others, you have been drastically disappointed, and eventually you would have just like, man, like I'm never going into any other one of these movies. They get better. They get so much better. So if I am to just say like for if I were to talk about the Jeepers Creepers franchise and how like I would grade that, I would say that it gets better with every movie. So the movies are great, but you just have to mow over this first film to get to the two others that are just so much better. And a lot of times people are like, well, I'm just going to not watch this one and jump into two or three, which is perfectly fine because I would rationalize that. So this movie is just like a barely okay grading, just because you really would probably just want to watch this just to get to the other ones. Um, just for me, I feel like the actual reason why you would come to this film isn't there enough. The actual Jeepers Creepers character isn't shown enough. The Creeper character is not shown enough, and it just comes off as a disappointing film. So like a barely okay to possibly like it really is completely held by certain characters' performances, and it's really just like I've seen movies like Forsaken, and so when seeing a movie like Forsaken, like that kind of reminds me of this a lot. So like I would just have to just barely say that this is a an almost bad to barely okay movie, and eventually we'll get into watching something better. I've had better, and we'll get to that eventually. If some people seem to consistently still be interested in the Jeepers Creepers thing, we're gonna go ahead and probably watch other two movies, just so that we can be much more happier about the other two films that are to be presented. But it's been a while since I've watched either one of those, so more than likely I may just be like, yeah, I built the other ones up into my head to be so good, and then, like when really watching them, but like from what I remember from them, like they're just heads and tails better than this original uh, movie. So let's go into it. Let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers because this is mostly just a road trip film that eventually takes us into people getting murdered at some point because they have to, because the Creeper's character needs to go and find some bates to eventually go and take certain specific pieces from them. So I've said my piece about this movie. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. Um, Man, like I really honestly just want to say that this is a bad film. I always want to try to be nice about films and to be like, well, yeah, it's something to watch. But this is just a bad film. This is like a bad first run of it, but evidently just did good enough to just garner sequels. And so, yeah. So, and I think that's probably like the bitter taste of a lot of people to just be like, man, like how is it that this movie kept doing sequels because the first one was so bad? It's like, well, because they did something better every single time afterwards. If you've never seen Jeepers Creepers 2 or 3, check them both out. They're actually really good. Some people may feel like the Jeepers Creepers 3 movie kind of like isn't as good as probably the second one, but like I think the second one has some merit and whatever to eventually seemingly be a decent film also. So spoilers now. So in the very beginning of this, like I had said, both Trish and Derry are to Derry, who is to be Justin Long's character, and Trish, who is to be Gina Phillips' character, are going on this drive to eventually go home for spring break. And so Darius to mention to Trish that, hey, like, aren't our parents going to be concerned that, like, you aren't going to be driving on home with a boyfriend at your side? And Trish is like, who cares? Like, if anything, just kind of like, we'll figure things out when we get there. So eventually we are to, of course, see these two driving along, kind of bickering, and it seems that they're making like weird games out of stuff where it seems like certain like bizarrish nicknames that they're call themselves, and eventually they have like a certain kind of set of things that they do. So all of a sudden they're to have this one thing where they end up reading these license plates and coming up with these like things where eventually I think one of the license plates Justin is to say, or Darius to say, like, hey, this one ends up saying like gay forever or something. And so Trish is to say it's like no, it ends up saying like sexy forever. And so eventually they both drive up to the very front of the car to see if these people are actually to be what their license plate is to say. And so Darius will look at these people and like, yeah, they're definitely sexy forever. So they end up driving along. So all of a sudden there ends up being this very uh, dirtied up, like freaking like brown looking, like as if like this truck had been coated in like sewer juice because it just looks freaking gross. And so that this truck was basically to be marinated in rust. So all of a sudden we end up having this truck with this such annoying horn where it's like ha ha, and it's like what the fuck. So all of a sudden Derry's like, hey man, go around me, like just go around, and the car is like ha ha, it's like good god, just freaking go around, and the cars are like ha ha, and Derry's like go around, it's like ha ha. 2 hours of just ha ha, and like go around, like just 2 hours just building up that suspense, just like really having to stretch that scene out. Wouldn't that be hilarious, right? To just have this whole thing about like just go around me. Like, cause really like I think that there are some scenes where they just really should have just stretched out more and just really should have just had a bizarre escalation of, because what does it really matter for like, because if there's like parts in a movie that really don't matter, you can just overly exaggerate them or just stretch them out just to be fun. So eventually the truck just decides to just go around them. And so Derry's like, oh, thank God. Like, thank God that this guy is freaking, like, out of our freaking, like, way. Because, like, that guy was so annoying. So eventually both Trish and Derry are to drive through. And eventually they are to make it to this like church, or just this one home that seemingly has this long stretch of pipe, because somebody's laying down some pipe. So there's this weird long stretch of pipe thing where all of a sudden we end up seeing the Creeper character in the shadows, because we barely see what this character really is, going ahead and dumping these body-sized bags of sorts. Like, I don't want to say bags because that probably doesn't even sound right. It just looks like somebody is in some kind of sheet and they're to be like tossed into this pipe. And here's the goofy thing. I don't know why the Creeper character all of a sudden has these like bed sheets to toss these characters into this pipe, because I'm like, one, in any of the other movies there is never to be that. Like, this guy isn't going and hoarding any of these body parts in any of the other film. Well, like in the third one, yeah, he technically does, but he just chucks it in the back of his truck. There's never him going and tossing these things down a pipeline anywhere. He just shoves it all in the back of his truck to just kind of preserve, I guess. So eventually Derry is to tell Trish, it's like, should we go back? Like, should we go back to just kind of see what this guy is doing? Because if anything, they could just really just go on and just go to some place, find a phone, and call somebody. No, instead, Derry makes the bright idea of like, you know what? How about we just kind of just go over there and just see if this guy is just going to be like still hanging around so we can go and just like go into this pipe and lay some pipe and eventually just like go and see like, you know what the heck, like maybe this will be a fun adventure. Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be just like going to Disney World, going and seeing what the heck is up with this. Because Derry makes the consensus to Trish. But oh wait, here's one thing. So we find out that these characters don't have a good working cell phone because, of course, you probably wouldn't during this time of era of whatever. Because I'm sure people still had like really crappy cell phones, or a lot of times a lot of people didn't care as much for cell phones as they would much more now, where it's like, hey, my phone is my life, and it's like an extension of my hand, and like, no offense to people that have that kind of mentality or think their way about their phones. I'm super glued to any kind of number of mobile device too, so or portable device, mobile device, but technically one and the same. Anyways, so Derry is to decide, well, hey, like, what if he is dropping a body down there? What if, like, someone is to desperately need our help and we didn't go back for them and they died? Like, what if that was you down there in that lay in that pipe? You know what I'm saying? Like, what if it was you? And so Trish is like, okay, fine, we'll go back there, and you're gonna regret it, and you're gonna be just shaken up about this whole event. Believe me, that's what's gonna happen. And so Derry's like, oh, okay, sure. So they end up going back to this place, and luckily enough, the Creeper character is to be gone. Well, how convenient is that? How just real convenient. So Derry is to decide to just go and eventually like put his body seemingly down this pipe, and Trish is to hold his feet. And so all of a sudden Derry is like, hey, there's something moving down here. Like, something's going on. I'm hearing noises. All of a sudden, Derry is to find out that there seemingly is a more than a couple things of these things called rats. And so all of a sudden, Trish is freaking out. Derry's freaking out. Trish lets go of Derry. Derry goes sliding down this pipe. And so all of a sudden, Derry's like, hey, good job. Good job letting me just slide down this pipe. Now it's going to be really hard for me to get the heck out of here. So eventually Derry is to go and take a walk through the fun journey of this hole to eventually find the Creeper's like newest catch, so to speak. And so Derry ends up going and is to kind of like see if like anybody's still alive. And so all of a sudden, this body ends up grabbing onto Derry by the leg or by the arm or something. Derry's like, "Oh my god!" And so eventually, Derry is to see this person's face and realize that his body had been opened up and had been sewed back together. And so this seemingly corpse is going and talking to Derry and whispering some kind of something that I can't exactly make out. Like he could have just been like, "Get the out of here, you're gonna die," or he could have just said, "Hey, hopefully you make it into the sequel because like this dude kills a lot of people." So then eventually this guy is to eventually keel over and die because of course he would. And so Derry just decides, well, you know what? This really isn't creepy enough that I just found this one body who has been opened up. Like, I'm just gonna go and find some other bodies just to kind of see if this is to be the only unique circumstance where there is to be this one body that is to be here. And so eventually Derry is to tell Trish, hey, like, go and find somebody off the side of the road, kind of ask them to eventually call the police and try to get the police down here. So eventually Derry is to kind of go through this a thing to eventually find a catacomb of corpses, let's just say, or just a crap ton of the people who at some point are to just be hanging around because they have nothing better to do. Uh, but they're not alive. They're all dead. They're just corpses. And so eventually Derry is to find seemingly this couple together that have no clothes on. And so eventually he is to see this woman who is to eventually have lost her head and her head was sewn back on. I'm like, man, I guess the creeper doesn't want to break up a set, so to speak, of body parts. Like, hey, man, like he's a collectible, or he's a collector. Like he just likes to just like make everything like back to mint condition. Weirdly, and so eventually what ends up happening is that Trish is to spot the creeper character driving back to this spot. And so Trish is like, oh my god, I'm gonna get in this freaking car and like I'm gonna try to like either make it back to town or whichever. And so all of a sudden we end up seeing Derry from out of nowhere just going and like going and like thrusting his head into this window and like, hey, it's like, so Trish is like, oh my god, you scared me. And so eventually Derry is like, we need to get out of here. And so they end up driving out of there. And so Trish is like, what did you see down there? And Derry is saying nothing. And Trish is like, you have to talk to me about like, what did you see? Did you see a mountain of gold down there? Did you see like the end of a rainbow? What did you see? Let me know in the comments below what you saw. Tell me, I need to know. And Derry was like, I saw a woman down there who had lost her head, and this guy decided to just sew this head back on. And so Derry is to find out that this guy is just weirdly preserving all these bodies as if it's like, and I don't want to make this analogy because it might be far too gross for anybody, but it just kind of feels like this is a person that is going and taking a person's body and to eventually be metaphorically like after like once you have leftovers of your food to put it back in the refrigerator just to like be like, okay, well I'm definitely gonna eat that on Tuesday. Like I'm just like, oh my god, like this guy, like this pipe thing, hole, whatever place, is to basically be this guy's weirdly enough refrigerator. So eventually Trish is to realize it's like, well, yeah, we really need to go and find some help. We really need to go and find somebody because like this guy is probably going to know that we were there, and also like I'm assuming that eventually he's going to eventually come after us. So, of course, the creeper vehicle does go after them, and eventually we have the creeper vehicle that ends up trying to ram uh, this car, and eventually what ends up happening is that eventually the two kids end up getting away, and they eventually make it to this old lady's house, who's to be this crazy cat lady. And so eventually what ends up happening is these two are of course like, hey lady, do you have a phone? And she's like, well, no, uh, but if anything, you can go and go further on into town. Just don't tell them that I'm here or that I was just helping you or whatever. And so all of a sudden this old lady is to have uh, these is to have all these cats. And so Derry's like, how many cats do you have? And she's like, more than a few or more than a couple. So so eventually what is her name, they just call her the cat lady in the credits. So eventually this cat lady is to, I guess, have a weapon on her. She is to have this shotgun. And so eventually there is to be this scarecrow in this cat lady's field. And so all of a sudden this scarecrow is to eventually be of the creeper who's just kind of like put his body on the scarecrow. And all of a sudden, excuse me, all of a sudden the cat lady is to notice that this scarecrow is different. And so she ends up heading on out there with this shotgun, and she ends up blasting away at the scarecrow, and the scarecrow ends up running off. The cat lady ends up going back into her home to eventually be attacked by the creeper character, and then eventually, I guess, the creeper character didn't have uh, anything to take from this woman. So eventually, at first, we seemed to think that the cat lady had maybe taken down the creeper, but we end up actually just finding out that the creeper is just carrying this cat lady outside this home to supposedly like give us an unsettling thing, or just maybe just creep us out. And like really for this movie now, like after the first time you kind of see this movie, like you never are to be like terrified of it again, because there's just very few scenes in this movie that have anything that is to um like make you like surprised about this movie. uh and plus there's really not much in this movie to actually be like scared about. Like there's not much here. There's no music that has any kind of build up that would make you go, oh, like I'm getting uneasy about all this. Oh no. So like all of this is just kind of like to the point where you can just enjoy this movie now, and like there's not any kind of scary bits in any parts of these Jeepers Creepers films. But a lot of people debate me. A lot of people are like, oh no, I'm still terrified about this movie, or I'm just so grossed out about this movie, or whichever. So so eventually what ends up happening is that uh, Derry is to just kind of mention at some point in this film, Derry was like, how is it that this creeper character got to go back to this to his home and then eventually come here so quickly. Like that seems so impossible. And so eventually both Trish and Derry are to run to their car. So like, dude, we just gotta get the heck out of here and eventually make it into town. So eventually the creeper character is to be in the road, and so they're like, dude, just run him down, run him over. So Trish decides that okay, we're gonna run him down, and we end up having this spot where the creeper character just basically just hops right on to the hood of this car, walks over the car, and then jumps down. And so when they end up backing up and trying to do it again, the creeper just easily just uh, jumps onto the back of the car, walks over again, and like does not have one scratch on him. And they're like, "Oh my god!" So eventually they keep doing this until eventually the creeper eventually smashes into the windshield, which I guess for supposedly for a lot of movie scenes, where eventually you are to see a person go and get hit by a car, and if you see them getting to where they end up hitting the windshield of the car, those people do that on purpose because supposedly the best place to actually like fall onto into a car is to be hit with the windshield, because anywhere else you could probably get actually hurt. But if you just try to like get your body to hit onto this windshield, like you should be pretty well in hand as far as like getting hit goes. So eventually, since the creeper is to finally like have gotten hit by this car, Trish goes on and on and on, just backing over this character, making sure supposedly that it's dead. But really, all that we see from like tire marks and whatever from this creature is it really just mostly took down like certain limbs or certain like arms or legs or whatever. Like it didn't like do anything with its head or much of possibly its other organs. But all of a sudden, the creepers be laying down, and all of a sudden, like these bat wings end up coming from its back to help us understand why this character is so absurdly fast, because of this giant wingspan, and how he doesn't even need a car to get to where he's going because he has freaking bat wings. So, but all of a sudden, like the bat wings, like all of a sudden aren't to make this character all of a sudden fly. We just have the bat wings that all of a sudden just crush off to the side. And so eventually they're like, well, F it, we're going to run over this thing again, and then make their way to town. So Trish and Derry are to find, I think, this diner. And so they end up asking for these people for a phone. And so coincidentally, what ends up happening is that eventually there is to be this phone at this diner, and the phone is starting to ring. And like there's one person at this diner is like, well, are you gonna get that? So eventually either Trish or Derry are to pick up the phone, and it's to be Giselle. And so Giselle is to mention to these people that if you are to ever hear the Jeepers Creepers song, run, or like try to protect yourself in the best way possible, because if you ever hear this song on the radio, that means something is going to happen and the creeper character is nearby or coming after you, which I don't think that they did that enough in any of the other films. I could be wrong about that, but really, when like there's a lot of points in the sequel thing where you can't really do that often. just because like there's so much action going on, or really it's just like how can you really consistently keep playing that up? And how convenient would it be for that song to consistently be playing somewhere with some iteration or whatever? So eventually, Giselle is to tell these characters that also at one point, one of them is to eventually go and be caught by this creeper and is going to scream the last scream that they are ever to scream because they're eventually going to get killed off by this thing. And so Derry's like, well, F you, lady. And so he ends up hanging up from her. Eventually, so we end up having Derry and Trish who end up calling the police, and so this sheriff is to otherwise arrive with his deputy, and so both of these, or I guess they are the troopers. Sure, the troopers. So uh, these troopers go on ahead and decide to drive Trish and Derry further into this town where it seems like there is to be uh, a much more troopers department that can uh, possibly be able to take care of these two. And and here's the interesting part: when Trish and Derry are to be in the diner, evidently one of the waitresses had spotted the creeper going and tearing through Trish and Derry's car to eventually go and take a big old whiff of Derry's laundry. And I guess also just kind of going and trying to like take sense of either one of these characters so I guess he can track them better. And so eventually Derry is to spot that there is to possibly be fingerprints on this car door, and the troopers mention it's like, well, I think that someone had like already tried to like weirdly take the fingerprints off of this car because it just looks weird. So Trish and Derry and the troopers decided in their two vehicles to just drive their way back into the further on part of town. So eventually what ends up happening is all of a sudden Derry is to when Trish is to kind of like adjust the radio, Derry is to all of a sudden hear the Jeepers Creepers song in a different variation. It's a much more updated song. And so Derry's like, oh my God, something's going to go down because the lady was to let me listen to this song and was to tell me if you're ever to hear that on the radio, which I don't know how you could really just continue to play that song on the radio for whatever reason. But again, I think that's the whole like they realized that like the song thing would not exactly work in all the other movies, but it's whichever. So that you would have to justify someone playing it or whatever. But anyways, so like I think that they should have had it in different variations or whatever. Or maybe I don't know, or come up with a much more popular song that is to be like I don't know, but like really doesn't fit the whole Jeepers. I don't know. It just like was it anyways. Pushing on. So what ends up happening is the troopers end up getting basically torn apart because eventually the creeper is to land on the trooper's car. The deputy or the one trooper is to like kind of put her head out of this vehicle for her to eventually just get killed off. And then eventually the other trooper, the creeper ends up just kind of taking his hand, ripping and tearing through the hood of this car to grab this guy's head and to rip it off. And so all of a sudden, both Trish and Derry are to figure out what's going on and be terrified about this. And so they end up kind of stopping their car. Their car ends up spinning around as well as the trooper car. And so they end up finding out that the creeper is in the trooper car because he ends up getting out of it. And so he ends up grabbing the trooper's head and goes and rips out the tongue of this guy, Z's face by basically using his teeth. And so that all of a sudden has Trish and Derry just going like, man, we're just going to have to go further in town and find somebody who's probably not going to believe this story, because Derry's like, well, yeah, no one's going to believe that this guy is just ripping tongues out of people with his teeth. No one's going to believe that stuff. That just seems too far-fetched. So they eventually go further on into town, and so eventually they bump into the Sergeant Davis Tubbs, and they of course try to explain all this. And so eventually, once we get here, we also have Jezebel, who is to be there. And so the sergeant is to mention that Jezebel is to be this town's supposed psychic, and that she had helped them on a case before. And so reasonably, that's just going to eventually help us out, like kind of develop this girl's backstory, and that she's just not a random insane person. So eventually Jezebel is trying to tell these people that she had dreamed eventually both Derry and Trish being surrounded by cats, and that Jezebel had dreamed about any number of these scenarios. And so Darius asked Jezebel, it's like, well, do all of them come true? And Jezebel is like, well, I can't be sure. So, or she doesn't really answer him. So eventually what does happen is eventually the power goes out on this precinct, because the creeper is to eventually go to where there is power and tear and rip it out, so that way of course this town loses power. So eventually the creeper is to make its way into this station, and eventually they are to go and start to do a head count to just kind of see like, hey, is everybody okay? And so all of a sudden there's to be this one police officer who is starting to comb through to eventually see if all the prisoners are accounted for, to all of a sudden see that one of the jail cells has been ripped open and one prisoner has been seemingly consumed. Certain limbs and stuff like that are to be seemingly devoured. And so all of a sudden now we are having, I guess, this one police officer trying to have a shootout with this creeper. And so all of a sudden the sergeant is to be on this walkie, just kind of like wanting to desperately get updates about whether or not, like how strong this is, or how strong this creature is, and everything about it. And so basically they're consistently giving updates and just mentioning how like this thing is just like seemingly unstoppable and seemingly hard to kill and whatever. So eventually it seems like this thing is going to head up the stairs to where these sergeants and troopers and whatever are. So eventually they're waiting for this thing to come, and they're like, okay, where the heck is this thing? And so one of the police officers is to eventually go out on his own to just kind of see where the heck this is, while all the other police officers are just kind of lining up their guns to like, where the heck is this? So eventually one police officer ends up going out to just kind of just be like, where, like, we hear this thing, but we don't know where it is. And so all of a sudden the police officer ends up looking up into the sky to realize that this thing is going to grab him and then of course rip out his heart. So this guy ends up falling over, and they're like, oh my god. So eventually they realize that this thing is on the ceiling, and so they're just kind of crazily firing away. So eventually we get to where Derry and Trish are to be in this interrogation room, and they're hoping that maybe there's some possible way that they can just kind of hide out in this room from this creature, which is honestly impossible because this thing can sniff people out. So eventually the creeper makes it into the interrogation room, and all the police try to make it into here, try to like just basically not have much of anything to do, because eventually the creeper is to grab both Trish and Derry and take a big old whiff of either one of them. And eventually the creeper is to decide that there's something from Derry that the creeper needs. And so the creeper chucks Trish, and Trish is like, no, like, you don't need anything from him. Like, take it from me. Like, me and him are one and the same. And the creeper all of a sudden ends up like doing its weird headpiece to extend all these like weird looking like finger esh like things that are all around his face, like as if he's like the creature of the Black Lagoon upon his like face, where how you see the creature of the Black Lagoon's like kind of weird gill like hands, like that's the thing that's kind of put upon his face. So eventually what happens is that this monster is to crash through this window, taking Derry with him. And so the real last thing that we end up actually seeing in this film is that it seems that the creeper ends up basically taking everything from Derry, either that or the creeper ends up just taking Derry's whole entire skin, to where you would probably assume one of two things: that eventually this creeper was going to come back and look like Justin Long, or that eventually it's like, okay, why did he, out of all things, take this character's skin? Or maybe he just took every bodily organ besides the skin. And so, yeah. So, and eventually we end up having, of course, the Jeepers Creepers song playing in the radio. And so the closer and closer that we get to Justin Long's skinned remains, eventually we're looking closer and closer into the Jeepers Creepers eyes. Or eventually we're looking into Justin Long's seemingly holes where his eyes were to be, and the closer and closer we get into that, the all of a sudden we end up seeing the creeper's eyes, and just he like kind of just pops his eyes out, and that's how the movie just ends. So with that said, yeah, interesting movie, but not as good as the other ones. Like, I guess for some people who probably just went on and watched this like well before, like some people could probably have a different consensus of this movie before going and watching the sequel films. Really, people could hold this movie in much more high regard because because this is the only one that they actually saw or liked or whatever. But yeah, so with that said, I am going to go out of my way to say that, yeah, I think that's all I have to really say here. Let me know in the comments below what you felt about this movie. If you like this more than the others, if you hate this one more than the others, if you just watch Jeepers Creepers 2 or 3 because you liked those besides this one. Because there's a lot of points in time when you have like a franchise movie of anything where eventually People only like certain ones and they only watch those. Maybe some people only watch this first one and they don't watch the others. I don't know. But with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.